All right, we're all here, which suggests we should get started. Welcome to our last panel of the day. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to our fabulous panelists, especially for being here. My name is Joshua Joey Shapiro. I'm a visiting fellow here at IPK, and I teach also at NYU. In the interest of full disclosure, since I think we should all sort of declare our allegiances off the bat in a space like this, I'm a Gooner, which is to say an Arsenal fan. And if I got the memo, I would have worn the shirt. Our men's team is a bit shit this year, but women just win the league. Thanks to Kim Little. There you go. In any case, I'm not wearing the shirt. I'm delighted to be here in any case. Our last panel here, which was titled just How to Watch This World Cup that's coming up in France, I think gets to the heart of why we're here, why we thought it was a good idea to organize this event today, which is essentially just to get at questions about what it is we should be doing and thinking about and reading and paying attention to as we watch these games that are about to start, in a way that sort of deepens our sense of what we're watching. Because as we know, we're not just watching games, we're not just watching sports, we're watching politics, we're watching identity, we're watching all kinds of things. I will say this illustrious group here, we were emailing a little bit in the last sort of 48 hours. And the question arose, what do you mean by the title of this panel? Does that mean, how should we watch, just in terms of what streams should we be finding? You know, who should we be following on Twitter? Is it on TV, the sort of prosaic questions? Or do we mean sort of more expansively, how should we watch? And I think what's interesting is that those questions actually go together. I think they're not unrelated at all, in a particular way. And that way is, I think, just the larger question of, do we sort of have the kind of system or the larger ecosystem, if you like, for sort of watching the Women's World Cup in an informed way? And what, if we don't, what will sort of take to get there? And so to start here, and I, like Rowan, I'm basically just going to sort of start this conversation and get out of the way. Although before doing that, I'm not going to introduce everyone because Shireen and Steph have already been introduced. They're here. I should say we're really delighted to have Gemma here, who's just written this book, Soccer Women, which you'll need to buy and read. And we're also delighted to have, there it is, hold it up, Gemma Clark, everyone. And Andrew Helms as well, who's a writer and documentary producer here in New York. He's a particular sort of expert and has done an audio documentary on women's professional soccer in the US, also produces TV for Frontline. And so delighted to have Andrew here as well. But the question I just want to start with, and this is for everyone, I suppose, but perhaps I'll sort of throw it to Steph first if you want to take it, is essentially that question. Where do we sort of have the means of sort of taking in the Women's World Cup as informed consumers and fans? How do you sort of go about doing that? And what do we need to get to a better place around that?
So it's interesting to me that you frame it as like informed consumers. Obviously, anytime you're dealing with FIFA, your hands are not 100% clean. More so in certain places than others. I think this is actually an interesting upcoming question for a lot of journalists in Qatar, because we've seen reports that by the time that World Cup happens, they estimate 4,000 workers will have died to build those stadiums. And they're literally importing people, taking their passports and creating, modern slavery. So can we as fans and media ethically consume that World Cup, knowing literally that people's blood have gone into that stadium? I think that's a question we're all going to have to wrestle with. Fortunately, it's not one we have to wrestle with right now. For the Women's World Cup, as an educated consumer, we touched on this earlier, burn it all down. I think it's important to, on the surface level, one of the things that I've always harped on is we see big blowout scores whenever you have a superpower like USA or France or Germany playing a developing team, usually from an African or an Asian nation, but sometimes, from Latin America as well. And so the first question you need to ask yourself in any game is, who is playing and how did they get here? So it's easy with the big countries. They have a lot of media coverage. I'm planning to contribute to the American women's media coverage, but you can find a story for every player on that team, basically, just about. But when they're playing a minnow, like they were doing in CONCACAF qualifying, and they're blowing teams out 10, 12 to nothing, I think it's important to ask yourself what created that scoreline. So I think that's the very first step you need to take in consuming the Women's World Cup. There's no game that doesn't happen that is not part of a larger context in the women's game.
Yeah, and this question, of course, it came up a little in your Burn It All Down session, but essentially the question of where one then goes for those stories, right? And I wonder if each of you could just speak to who is it you go to sort of say, okay, what is the deeper context of whatever country it is you're watching or taking in the game?
I don't like to get my sports from only straight, cishet, white, able-bodied men. So that actually takes out 98% of the me who like sports media force. So what that means is, and I said this before, diversify where you get your media from, because the lens at which different people look at football particularly, and I'm very sensitive to women's football because of, for example, my own history with it. One of the reasons I became a sports journalist is specifically because I didn't like the way that Muslim women were written of in sports. That was actually my motivation. And, you learn a lot. So as consumers and as we do it, I think it's important to look at the history. And I don't think I've ever said this. Is Brenda here? Because I'm a bit embarrassed to say this. I hated history as a student. I thought it was super boring. And I was in Canada, and like Canadian history, post-Confederation is super boring. But when I started to learn about sports history, and like Steph said, now historians are like my biggest tool as a sports journalist to find out the stories that we didn't know, like the one Josh and Bren wrote about, like the one like Gemma's chronicled, like my friend Gwendolyn wrote a book, Gwendolyn Oxenham, she did. Jean Williams in the UK is invaluable on the history of, football for women in England. And you write about this, and, and when I say history, I also mean present, because very soon it becomes history. Like I'm very good friends with the captain of the Pakistan women's national football team and their struggle and what they're enduring. And these are really important stories. I don't get light. Another story that's really important to me is the lack of access of that women have to football. This is also a story, and one that got a lot of play in the World Cup in 2018, like women being banned from stadiums and it on. That wasn't a new story. I wrote about it 4 years ago, but that's the other thing. It doesn't get play from mainstream. So as a request, as a freelance journalist, look at independent media. Look at the people in the margins that are writing these stories that often they find first, they write about first, that don't get the New York Times immediately, that don't get those places. It's sort of like a plea I have to everybody. Like, I'm an independent journalist as well. And, like, don't get me wrong, if BBC wants me to write an article a week, I'll do it. But for now, that's not happening. So, look to those stories and look to different people like that. My friend and co-host Jessica Luther said something that has always stuck with me. Who tells the story is as important as the story itself. And that speaks to lived experience. And that speaks to what's happening. And for me, that's a big part of it. So if you are looking at documentaries, look around, look at documentaries online with all the sources you have, Instagram, YouTube. Look for documentary filmmakers in other parts of the world that'll tell a story. Like, tune into BBC Africa. I have a friend named Janine Anthony that I'm trying to name drop because I think her work is incredible. And she tells stories in a way, she said, of Lagos, and she's a huge Arsenal fan too. Like, she's a long-suffering Arsenal fan, but those things are really important. And if you actually want a list, I have a Google list of women of color and non-binary folks of color in sports media, majority. And if you want that list, I'm happy to give you that document to diversify where you get your media from, because it'll enrich your view of the game as well.
Real quick, if you want another jumping off point, the NWSL Media Association membership list can be a resource for finding people who are, it's a mix of bigger and smaller outlets, but even smaller outlets like local newspapers will have the in-depth coverage that, the CNNs and ESPNs are going to miss out on.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. And I guess one way to sort of paraphrase that is essentially just don't be lazy. It's like one can go out there, the stuff is out there. If you want to learn about whatever team, it's there. And I wondered, Gemma, just to ask you a question, speaking of the ways in which it's not just the present that we're looking at when we look at these games, but the past. And as someone who's just published a book about the history of women's soccer, I wonder if you could just talk about, when you're sort of tuning into the World Cup this summer, what are the particular histories you'll be sort of thinking of and pondering as you watch games?
I think for me it was, in writing this book was really important. Actually, I heard something Shireen said in an interview a couple of years ago about avoiding American exceptionalism. And so in writing this book, it was really important to me to find those stories that hadn't been told, to write about, women from Pakistan and Iran and the Papua New Guinea women's under-20 team, which is just an incredible story. And also to write about the history of the women's game and the World Cup from the perspectives of the players. And it really is an incredible history, the fact that the women actually had to fight to even be given a tournament. I mean, none of this is really surprising, is it? Because everything's a fight. But they fought to be given a tournament in the first place, and Michelle Akers described sitting in rooms with like Beckenbauer and Pele and hearing them discuss how women couldn't possibly play for 90 minutes. And there's Michelle Akers, who's this absolute immense powerhouse who played with a terrible condition and kept playing, and is just such a incredible athlete. And she has to sit and listen to all these men telling her that she can't play for 90 minutes. So all the games for the first World Cup were 80 minutes long. And it wasn't called the World Cup because FIFA didn't want to, deign to offer their brand to it at that stage because they weren't sure it was going to be successful. So it was like the FIFA M&M's first women's invitational. It was like a 30-word title. And the American women won in China. The games weren't broadcast outside China, but in China, it was absolutely huge. And so they had this amazing reception and flew back to the US, and there were 3 people at JFK meeting them there, and it was sort of a complete damp squib. No one here knew, no one here cared, and so I think, just looking at the World Cup now that's about to start and seeing, how far we've come, I mean, there's still a long way to go, is really positive, but it is worth exploring, what it's taken to get here.
Yeah, and question for you, Andrew, as someone who's especially versed, I think, in the sort of side of the soccer ecosystem that's about the kind of professional game and about the ways in which the World Cup sort of jibes with and doesn't jibe with the professional game in terms of the economics of it, in terms of player development, everything. I wonder if you could just talk about what that picture looks like now vis-a-vis the past and where perhaps it's heading.
Yeah, so I just finished, it's out now on ESPN 30 for 30 podcast, so you can check it out. It's called Back Pass. It's the story of the rise and fall of the first women's pro league, so the one that was started after 99, incredible success, and then 3 years later, it folds 5 days before the 03 World Cup. And so we all remember that moment, and the 99 team were on the covers of every magazine. And then it came time to start building a pro league. And one story, this actually didn't end up making the podcast, but I've been thinking about as we're watching kind of all the big brands get hyped for the 2019 World Cup, and we're watching all the amazing commercials, the German national team's rollout. I forget what the German bank, and it was this really amazing ad. We see all these brands who are pumping money and investment into the women's game around every 4 years around a World Cup. And so when the first women's pro league in the world was getting started, 2 of the founders from that league, who were big time cable execs, flew to Sun Valley, Idaho to meet with the head of Nike, Phil Knight. And so three old white guys sitting around a lodge in Idaho, and they're deciding whether or not Nike is going to be the kit sponsor for the whole league. And Phil Knight says, you know what, really love what you're doing, but we're just going to keep sponsoring Mia Hamm. And so not willing to spend what would have been chump change to Nike, a couple $1 million a year, to be the kit sponsor for this women's pro league. And one of the reasons this league ultimately subsided and went away is they just couldn't get sponsorship money that they thought they were going to get. They'd expected corporations that were going to step up and contribute, and a lot didn't. So I think that's one thing we should always be. I think you kind of see a lot of people on Twitter and social media. It's like, yes, so great to see Nike, being out front, cheering along. It's like, okay, but are you going to be a sponsor? What are you doing for NWSL? You'll hear, if you listen to the podcast, we kind of tell the stories of a few of the kind of like rank and file players, not national team, but women who, for the first time in their lives, had a chance to be pro athletes. And it's an interesting question that the founder of the league said to me. It's who are going to be the people who want to step up and support that, Jackie Little, someone who'd graduated from Santa Clara but was never going to make the national team. Who are going to be the women who are going to, what are the companies going to be to support those women being pro athletes? Because it's not just the 20 women on the national team. We need to open this pool. So that's kind of one thing I think we should all be paying attention to this summer.
And that, it's interesting, that kind of those comments about marketability and the sort of reductiveness and tedium of saying, is it marketable, makes me think of the sort of presence of social media, which you also just mentioned, and a couple of videos in particular right before this World Cup that have gone viral. The England one, is that right? What was it? Which was the other one?
The Germany one,
The Germany one that you just mentioned, right. I wonder if you guys could just talk a bit, anyone, essentially about the role of social media and sort of following and thinking about and sort of getting ready for this World Cup.
So I'll tell you one thing. One of the main contributors, in my opinion, to the growth of women's soccer has been the internet. When Wusa launched, he was on PAX Network. No one I knew had
TNT,
PAX.
then PAX.
Oh, okay, yeah. No one I knew had PAX.
Which is another problem that they run.
If you had PAX, that's because you had a giant cable package and you were rich. And I didn't have a lot of rich friends. I wish. But now along comes the internet. I remember streaming 2008 Olympic Games on, not the greatest resolution, but I could still tell who was who. That was incredible. And I think it was free. Even now, NWSL games all stream on Yahoo Sports for free, which I have my issues with in terms of NWSL getting money from a broadcast deal. But the point being, we have unprecedented levels of access to women's soccer. So social media, the internet, they're huge. I remember back when Twitter kind of was newer, we used to have something called WPS chat. Does anybody remember this? Am I really old? It was hashtag WPS chat. And in hashtag, you could talk to Jarl Averbuch, basically, directly to the players. And that's how we would have Q&As and stuff about WPS. So I think social media has been a huge contributor to the growth of the game, and if used correctly, it's going to continue to be a prime platform for driving conversation about not just soccer but women's sports in general.
I get a lot of my women's soccer off the internet, like the Champions League women's finals on Facebook. That's how I watch it, so it's accessible in that way. Like the NWSL, I would watch on YouTube. I'm in Canada, so the Yahoo Sports is blocked for me. So that also. You watch directly on the site? I know. So but I'm just saying that it's always important, and I struggle with. I want it to be profitable for the players, but I want it to be accessible for people. So then I also struggle with that. I also struggle with the idea, just to touch on this quickly, I love social media around the Women's World Cup. And I think it's such a change because 2019 in France is all about the World Cup. I couldn't find a French kit for 2015. I couldn't find one. I called my friends in France. They're like, we can't find one either. And so but this is the thing. I don't want to see, and I see this as a sports writer and a consumer of women's hockey, I don't only want to see women's football being celebrated every 4 years. It needs to be supported at all levels, consistently, federations need to be engaged, teams need to be supported. We don't want to see that. And then it becomes the issue of nationalism as well. I want the women in those leagues, and we've seen the rise of club teams and have them in from Portugal all the way to Italy and all over the world, Latin America. The rise of, so it's like, not like the interest isn't there. And we forget that in the United States, the most watched match of all time in the history of the United States was the final in 2015 between Japan and the United States. So don't tell me there's no interest here. I don't buy it. And the internet will facilitate that in a lot of ways. But I just want to make sure that we keep using the tools consistently to keep it at a level where it helps grow the game and support the players.
Excellent. I'm tempted, you guys, I mean, those of you who were in the last session already sort of offered your picks for the final. And I'm tempted just to leap to the sort of prognostication part of the panel. But I'll do that in a slightly different way. And then I just want to open it up to questions. And the question I want to ask all of you essentially is just quite simply, what are the stories that you're finding most interesting about this World Cup? We always project narratives onto teams and onto matches, and I wonder what some of those narratives are for you guys next month.
I can start, yeah. This is a story I have not yet written, but I'm in the middle of writing, and I talked to the head coach of the Portland Thorns the other day, Mark Parsons, and he told me, I was kind of asking about the growth of the women's professional game in Europe, and one thing he said was, the thing that's surprising to him whenever he talks to a U.S. under-17 coach or a U.S. under-20 coach, the U.S. women's national team player, youth players are going up against, and the U.S. youth coaches will say, you know what, we're playing against women coming out of Bayern's academy at 17, 18 who are professional players. And yeah, and that the more investment that's coming from Lyon, from PSG, from some of these big teams in Europe that are actually putting financial resources into the women's game, what's that going to mean when that in some ways, you know, his point was, we're surprised every 4 years as Americans at how good the rest of the world is becoming, right? We're going to be very surprised this time. So I'm really excited to watch, you know, rooting for the U.S., but obviously watch some other countries really, you know, show us what we need to do to make sure that we're competing with them and with that kind of investment in the women's game.
Wasn't there recently a story about Arsenal opening up their boys teams now to elite girls as well? They just had, I think, 2 girls in who were like 12, 13, that age range, to come play with the boys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's and you know, it's Title IX college, amazing. It's a 4-month season, right? Compared to a year-round professional training environment. If you're, you know, going to be coming through, you know, Man City's putting a lot of money into their women's program. Like this is the yeah. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, which is coming from Qatar again, so it's not ideal. Breaking some fair play rules, I think, but still,
yeah,
baby steps, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, financial. But also, I'd say that, you know, that the World Cup is a great place to learn about, you know, sports in different countries and geopolitically. And I think Jamaica is a great story. Khadija Shaw, who I think The Guardian named her the Player of the Year last year. She's pretty much single-handedly powered them to the World Cup. She's an incredible forward, and she, you know, comes from a difficult place. I think she's lost 4 brothers and 3 of them to gang violence, and so just learning, I think, about these athletes who've overcome immense odds, and you know, for me, I'm a Leicester City fan, so I love an underdog, and it has paid off in my case. Indeed. Doesn't often happen, but so I love the small teams, and, you know, finding out more about teams I didn't know about.
So is England going to bring football home?
I know, we're trying. I mean, we're trying a long time, but I'm, you know, England, I guess, is ever so slightly problematic as a country, as we all know. But I love them.
Many countries are ever so slightly problematic.
Yeah.
But didn't we establish home was China 2,000 years ago?
Yes, we did.
I hope they win. I can't help it. I can't get it out of my blood. It's still there. But and I think we've got a good chance.
Who sang that song in the 96 Euros?
Oh, it was
song.
the Lightning Seeds.
The Lightning Seeds.
Yeah, I know. They've made a lot of money off that one
I'm
song.
sure they did.
Yeah.
The Football's Coming Home song.
No, Lightning Seeds. It's It's a great song.
Great song.
As an English person, we've heard it a lot.
Who's an England player
Every tournament we play it. So
who's an England player you're excited to watch? I know there's some who are familiar to American fans through NWSL, but
Nikita Paris, I think, is going to be. Yeah,
I think
awesome.
she's an underrated international player. People are going to know her name after this tournament.
Yeah, and Fran Kirby as well is super talented. Yeah, they've got some really, really good players.
Excellent. Who have we not heard from about stories you're particularly interested in? I'm going to give you guys my.
I'll share with you. I really like when Andrew said about youth. I follow the under 19. I follow the under 17 in 2016 because it was the first tournament to ever be held in the Middle East, and it was a women's tournament. It was the first time post the hijab ban being lifted. So we saw Jordan as the host team. They got a bye. And when you see the other teams in the under 20s this year, Southeast Asia is the strongest in the youth and in the youth World Cups. And so I love what you said about we're so surprised that everyone's really good. But I'm sorry, Japan's been really good for a really long time. And I mean, I know it's a sore spot for some people, but for some of us, it's like glorious and wonderful. But, you know, but that being said, like, don't get me wrong, I'm not reveling in 2011. Canada came dead last. But I think that we forget that soccer exists in different ways in different parts of the world. And that's why I like to be positive about it, because it's a form of connection. So I really like that idea about connecting through football. I know I sound really, airy-fairy philosophical about how football is a form of development and connection, but I actually truly feel that way. And I feel like it connects me with different people in the other parts of the world. Like if you think about it very lyrically, the idea, and my friend Laurent Dubois talked about it, and I love what he said, that football is like the greatest form of mass torture known to humankind. And in that moment in the world, someone is jumping up in jubilation and someone is cowering in sadness and just defeat. And that moment where you're with everybody, it just gives me goosebumps. So just those stories about fandom and connection, I think, are really important, particularly when in a place like France too, where the incidence of xenophobia are so high and there's this negative sense in the world towards global south or towards migration, towards everybody else, without realizing that their own team are very heavily based up of immigrant stories. So that kind of stuff is very interesting for me, and to look at that and look beyond just look at how you can have multiple identities, because that's something that I feel is not looked at enough because of the issue of nationalism within sport. So multiple identities that you can have. So that's something that I would look at.
Not to make everything about the first women's pro league, but on the issue of connection, though, it was a story I heard that the first women's pro league, WSA, they brought the first ever Chinese players to play professional sports in the United States. So pre-Yao Ming was Sun Wen and 4 other Chinese players joined WSA. Sissy, I'm blanking on, she played for the Washington Freedom and she scored the goal in the first game when Mia Hamm got fouled by Brandy Chastain. I'm not remembering her name right now. But there were incredible diversity of players, and what one of the women's national team players said in the 2003 World Cup when they were struggling was, it was kind of okay because I saw all my friends on the other teams because they'd gotten to know each other playing in WSA, and that had never happened before because there never had been a pro league where women from multiple countries could play together on the same team. So that was, I think it's both for the fans, but also for the folks on the field.
You guys remember in WPS when one team had Marta, Christine Sinclair, and at her peak, Abby Wambach, like at the same time? That was
Dream Team.
The Flash, Western New York Flash. Right. Before they were the NWSL Western New York Flash. Yeah. Yeah. Western New York, that bustling metropolis. I'm so sorry, Rochester and Buffalo fans. Stories I'm interested in. I tend to attach to players a lot more than particular national teams. I'm very excited for Kim Little. Sorry, England. She kind of, I'm so sad that she left NWSL, and she's had injuries in her career. It's so sad when you see a player like Kim Little or Kelly Smith. I just imagine Kelly Smith with an injury-free career. What heights would she have reached if she had never had any kind of serious? Christine Sinclair is going to break that record. Yeah. And also Ji So-yeon from South Korea. I got to root for the motherland in some shape or form. And I don't think they're going to go especially deep into knockouts, but I think it's like this with any immigrant community. If one of you does well, then the whole community somehow finds out about it. So Son Heung-min, my parents don't watch soccer, but my dad somehow knows about him, and he's like, "Oh, we should have had you play soccer more." And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? Now you want or when Sari Park was dominating LPGA, it's like, "Oh, I should have had you playing golf more." I was like, "So you think I would have had an LPGA career comparable to Sari Park if only you had started me on golf sooner?" Sure, why not?
I love stuff what you just had to say about, the sort of, whether it's sort of atavistic or sentimental or whatever, the connections we all have with a motherland, real or imagined, and the ways in which soccer and watching the World Cup can be this way to sort of articulate that in a way that feels perhaps less nationalistic and more fun or something than other ways one might be able to articulate it. I think I want to basically just open this to questions because I think there are a lot of questions in the room. But very quickly first, we need to know who everyone thinks is going to win. Andrew, who you got?
I just put money on this the other day. Australia's 20-1 if anyone is gambling. So I think they're the favorite with the best odds in terms of you making money.
That's right now.
I think I like Australia, and I really allez les bleus.
Allez les bleus. Gemma, who you got?
I'm going to go Germany.
Go Germany.
I mean, kind of obvious, but also...
I was going to say, spoken like a true Leicester City fan. Gary Lineker's immortal line. Football's a simple game. You play and then Germany wins in the end.
Exactly. We English, we know that more than anything.
Yeah.
Not always.
Right. Who you got?
So my head says Australia, but for some reason I've latched on to this narrative that England is going to somehow sneak through, like while everybody else is fighting, they're just in the background, pay no attention to us. We're headed for the cup over here. Somehow something weird is going to happen in knockout that's going to clear the way for them to go all the way to the final. Somehow.
I really hope so.
I don't know I can't explain it. There's no logic attached to it. If you asked me to trace through a bracket to be explain why, I couldn't tell you. But for some reason, I'm just all this mishkas is happening over here. Somehow England's just gonna it's like a classic heist, right? You create a distraction, you steal the crown jewels, and you go.
I hope this is recorded because we're going to keep that. In 6 weeks, we're going to say, Steph called it.
Yeah. I was non-committal to a winner, but I'll call the final, which I did, which
Right.
France, Australia. Sam Kerr is a genius. I haven't seen that energy. She's brilliant. She's just, and Australia has been supporting their women's team on the ground. They have support socially, community-wise, and they're on the other side of the world, so we tend to forget about them. They're, for me, something that is really going to come up. And I feel like the energy in France right now, I think Les Bleus will do very well. They're basically the team of Olympique Lyonnais, which is the best club team in the world, in my opinion, of women. I know the Wolfsburg German fans will come at me because they always do on Twitter. How can you say that? Mad respect to you also. But for me, that's hugely what it is. England, I can't believe I'm going to say this. What Phil Neville's done, I'm impressed with, and I'm never going to give props to an English white man if I don't have to. But he is really he's really developed and believed in their morale, particularly after the entire devastation with Eni Aluko happened. has been terrible for that team. They need to come out of that. Like, I still haven't forgiven the FA for that. And the lack of support for me is like one of the reasons I don't know if I can support them wholeheartedly. I'm not saying there's not institutionalized systems of oppression and racism in every federation. There are, but that one was very severe. And as we move forward, it's okay to say we're going to move forward, but I don't think that issue was addressed the way it needed to be to come clean fully. That's my take on it. So, I wish everybody luck. And I feel like in this situation, when one accelerates and wins, we all win, except for the US. Anyways.
I heard that. I wish everybody luck, and then in parentheses, like, except the United States.
It's interesting no one picked the US, right? That's interesting.
Striking.
They're odds-on favorites. No one thinks they're going to win.
But, have you seen them?
I know, yeah. I mean, everything's up front.
They're doing the, they're counting on we're going to score, mad goals. Like, other team can't win if they're never in our defensive half, so we don't have to deal with defense. We're just going to pile, 7 attackers into the other half, and, that's good, right? No fullback, no relief in terms of fullbacks, just crystal
it's like
done.
Jenga soccer. Just keep putting everything up and then hope.
Or something weird is going to happen, with the Cards, in 2015, and we're going to get another Morgan Bryan moment, but not out of Morgan Bryan.
Excellent. I think we should open this to questions. Questions from you all for these 4 up here. Yeah.
So this actually, during the I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning of your very wonderful, thank you all for this. This was fabulous, everything that I heard today. Talking about journalism and independent journalists, and my question is actually, I'm really curious if you all have found, those of you who are going to be covering it, do people, because you're all doing really in-depth work and have networks on the smaller teams, on the players, right? Have you found that people either steal your stuff from, or are they not interested, just blatantly not interested? Do they steal your stuff, or do they actually reach out and maybe interview you ever, the bigger media sources? So your relationship as people who are actually way more knowledgeable and on the ground, and the larger media kind of outlets?
So I've had pretty good luck in that whenever, we do on the ground reporting and then gradually the bigger outlets start to pick it up. Usually it's a negative story because that's when they like to pay attention. They do a pretty good job of linking back to the original reporting. For example, most recently, Equalizer and Once a Metro, which I contributed to, broke the story on Sky Blue FC and all their problems. And then larger outlets like Think Progress and stuff started to pick up on it. And then because Governor Phil Murphy was involved, national outlets were like, oh, what's going on here? Let's pay attention to women's soccer because it's a scandal. But I think they did a decent job of linking. I haven't seen too much that there's been outright theft. Sometimes there's a little bit of a problem with accreditation, or if you run a subscription, they'll somebody will take material from below the subscription cut, which kind of then bites you in the butt because that's money out of your pocket. But I haven't seen a ton of that so far. I think there's a lot of, I don't want to say honor, but I think we realize there's so few of us in the game, especially exclusively covering women's soccer. If one person screws up, it's not hard for the rest of us to find out about it. So I think the size of the community right now is helping with that.
Just a quick note on questions. We're going to just take 2 or 3 in between, just so we can hear.
Just on theft, I don't pitch to large, I pitch directly to editors. I don't pitch just randomly to a pitch desk. I don't do that. I've had that happen too often. And it's just forget it. And I have a great reputation with the people that I do contribute with generally. So I sort of just email them directly. So this is my idea. Do you think it'll work, et cetera? Or people commission directly from me on a story idea that they have. And I said, yeah, I think I'm a good fit. If it's out of my wheelhouse or it's from a community that I'm not a part of, I'll direct them to somebody from that community. I don't write about LGBTIQ stuff because I'm not from that community. And if they ask me about particular issues in Black communities, I'm not Black. So it's a practice. You pass that on to somebody else. I like what Steph said about there is a small community. The first thing I do as a journalist is I'll actually Google the topic, which you'd be surprised that so many journalists sometimes do not do. Like, I'm talking about huge outlets, and that's the irony here. Like, big places won't even Google to look back to who might have covered the story so they could even insert it. It doesn't take a lot to hyperlink. If I can amplify someone's work that has come before me, I'll do it. But that's a personal practice. And I mean, those are my own things. Like, I'm not particularly, the stuff I write about, not a lot of people find sexy anyway. Like, the intersections of misogyny and racism in sport is really not it's not like, the most profitable beat, but there's some stuff there, right? So, and if people do want to interview, I'll do that. But also, like, then you get into the issues of time and labor. Like, if I have people writing stories on Arab communities or Muslim communities, they'll message me and they'll be like, oh, I'm writing a story about Muslim women's sport. Can you tell me everything you think about Muslim women in football? And I'm like, yes, I charge 250 pounds an hour. I don't charge 250 pounds an hour. But I'll never hear from them. So it's that kind of stuff that's also irritating. It's not just the theft, it's just if I have students message me, I'll always try to help out students, always. And just as another thing is if you email me for a request or something like that, if you're from a marginalized community, I'll reply to you within 3 days. I have like my own boundaries. So everyone's different, right? So.
Just to reiterate, this was great, really, really interesting. But I have a question about whether you think, somebody mentioned Ali Wagner earlier in the coverage. Was it you, Steph? I don't know. And I agree that her analysis is fantastic. And I've seen a sort of what I would say an improvement on coverage of the games. But I would still say that's one of the areas that the women's game kind of lacks consistent, good coverage. And I wondered what you guys thought about that in terms of who you like to listen to covering the games, and what would be some ways that could be improved. I mean, I kind of hate the sort of up close and personalizing rather than the kind of coverage of the play. And I think that the U.S. media has a tendency to kind of talk about personal stories, and I think sometimes that actually is a problem in terms of recognizing what the play, the incredible power of the play. So I wondered what you guys thought about coverage in general.
Lindsay Horan didn't go to college. Did you know that? Lindsay Horan did not go to college. She skipped college to go pro. Yes. Lindsay Horan went to France. She did not go to college. Did you know that? It's incredible. Mal Pugh also did not go to college. So I understand what you're talking about a little bit. In terms of improvement and consistency, so on the NWSL level, they get $300 to call a game, $300. And that's before, like, if you're not in the Florida area, because they're all done from Vistalink, I think it's called. That's where the production center is. So the games are being recorded, like the cameras are at the field, the signal's beamed back to Florida, and then it's beamed to us. That's how you're watching NWSL games. And so if you have to travel to Florida to cover a game, that's airfare and lodging, $300 a game. So what kind of talent can you get for that? We recently had someone come up who was working in USL, I believe, who was very good. She's English. I can't remember her name. It was a very English name. Poppy something, maybe? But she was quite good, but like she was the exception. She was maybe the 5%. The rest of them are, there has to be more money invested in that side of things in order to get improvement and consistency. It comes down to money, and production value matters. If you watched a Champions League game, but it was fuzzy and there's no intro graphics, there's no music, there's very little atmosphere, you would think it was the most boring thing in the world. It could be like some super exciting back and forth, like Barca and Arsenal, we'll just, for your sake, and they're trading goals back and forth, and there's like 11 total goals in the game, but if there's no production value, who would care? On the flip side, you can have a boring, like, children's game, but if you added a bunch of exciting graphics, it would like the Little League World Cup or like the World Series. Yeah. Yeah. That has a bunch of interesting graphics packages, and they've got an experienced analysis and people calling that stuff. So people tune in because it's fun and exciting to watch. So it comes down to financial investment. In terms of who I like, obviously Ally Wagner, but I like Derek Ray. That's a great combo. Derek Ray is clearly someone who preps, unlike, some other people who have called games. So, and it shows. So.
Hi, thank you all. Sorry, this question is a bit of an indulgence, but I have a panel of soccer scholars ahead of me. So I was wondering if any of you could speak to what happened to the LA Soul. What was that?
So the LA Soul were a team in the second iteration of women's pro soccer in the United States, WPS, and they were owned and operated by a guy named Phil Anschutz. Which is an interesting story because Phil Anschutz is, if you watch Major League Soccer, the Major League Soccer championship trophy is the Anschutz trophy. That, the apocryphal story that when Major League Soccer had lost $250 million in its first 5 years, there was a meeting in Los Angeles with Phil Anschutz, Lamar Hunt, and Bob Kraft, and Don Garber, who's the commissioner of Major League Soccer, and the bankruptcy lawyers were there. And, after 5 years, Major League Soccer had lost a lot of money. There were no audiences. Are we going to keep this thing going? And Grandpa Phil said, let's do it. And so those three guys, some friendly billionaires who were willing to lose a lot of money. MLS has still, as a league, has never made a profit. Don Garber said recently he hopes the league will turn a profit by 2026. So that's 30 years after the league is founded, right? Phil Anschutz ran a women's team in Los Angeles for 1 year, decided that there was no market for it, and shut it down.
I mean, we even had Marta.
You did have Marta, yeah. Yeah, no, and so I think it gets at this, one of the things which you will hear when everyone in this room listens to Backpass is the lack of willingness of investors and sponsors to lose money on women's sports, and how just genuinely unfair and inequitable it is. Not to one of the last stories in the podcast is the women's league in its final year lost $17 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but it's a startup league. It's expensive. You have to pay for a lot of stuff. When the MLS commissioner Don Garber heard that in 2003 WSA lost $17 million, he said, oh my God, I would have gotten a raise if I lost $17 million. We lost $75 million. So I think it's a sad story of what happened, but I think it speaks to this larger trend this book came up earlier, their investors don't claim that you don't make money in women's sports, but they also don't invest the resources, they don't invest the time to build a market and grow a market so that you have fans sticking around in the long term. It takes a while to develop an allegiance to a team. That's not something that happens overnight.
I'm interested in your opinion on what would be the one media moment that elevated women's soccer to the level that we have right now. What one media moment, or what moment?
Oh, I would probably say the Brandy Chastain scoring the penalty just in terms of that lodging in the consciousness of people around the world, and it being kind of an iconic photo and an iconic moment. I think that really sort of spread beyond soccer, and it's the thing that people really think about when they think about 99, and even though there was so much work that went into it, and Brianna Scurry saved a penalty and arguably did more for the game probably in that, but people think about the Brandy Chastain moment, and it was covered so extensively and with such kind of there was a lot of sanctimony about it, and about her exposing her bra, and it became a talking point. So I would say that moment.
So I tend to divide women's soccer roughly into eras. So the 1970, 1971, where we had like kind of test run World Cups in Italy and Mexico, that's like beta. And then women's soccer 1.0 is like kind of the 80s up until that 99. And then the paradigm shift, that's 2.0, and that's running us through the leagues and WPS up until 2011, which is when I think the last shift happened, because Germany showed that if you put the resources into a Women's World Cup and, you know, broadcasters, if you put resources into production value, the audience is there. I think there was something about like they wildly underestimated the return on all their ad time that they were selling. Like it was in the millions that they had underestimated the money that they were supposed to get from ads in 2011. And they completely underestimated audiences as well. And that was, I think, the flip into maybe the next 3.0. So 2011, I mean, we all remember the quarterfinal game, like Ian Darke's call, like, oh, Abby Wambach has saved the USA's life in this quarterfinal. Like that was an iconic moment, no matter what I think about the United States or Abby right now, but like you can't deny the power of iconic moments like that. So I think 2011 was the last big shift. I don't think we're going to see another really big shift like that unless something crazy happens in this World Cup. But I think right now we're all just building on that, and we're in the current, like, in my mind, the 3.0 era.
I think it also matters where you're talking about. If you're talking about where a shift had happened, like I say, his mix shift, I think around the world was, I would agree with Chema, for me, Brandy was iconic. But following that, and as Steph has so beautifully like compartmentalized them, different times meant different things to different people. And I think like Celia Sasic scoring like 8 goals on Cameroon was a really big deal in 2015. So in Germany, it made a really big deal, after which she retired. So like, who was affected and where? Do you know what I mean? So it's, I mean, if we're looking at here, then obviously I think I would say Brandy, like that's something when I look back to it, it was 99 was huge. So, but I mean, and we're looking, I think we'll see some shifty stuff. I mean, you'll see records being broken, definitely in this. I know, right? Like, it's unfathomable. No, but like, I think we'll see. I do also think that already it's happening. I think that Ada Hegerberg, who is like the Ballon d'Or winner, not being at the World Cup is a huge thing. That is a shift. That is a protest. I mean, we're seeing this type of beautiful manifestation of resistance in women's football. That in itself is causing change. And we won't see the effect of that until after the World Cup is over and see the effects of that. And I mean, for me, that is shaking up. Like, we're seeing shakeups in different part of the world. We've seen resistance in Denmark. They went on strike. They boycotted to the extent that they didn't end up qualifying for the World Cup, and they're second at the Euros. We're seeing Ireland push back. We're seeing places all over the world, like literally all over the world, push back. And that's a tenacity with which I don't know if we deserve, but we're getting.
Sharina, I love this thing you said earlier about how the real point of what you do is to think about soccer as a point of connection and a meeting place, a way for us to connect to each other. And that's what we're trying to do here, you know, at the Institute for Public Knowledge all the time, is to find, you know, sources of conversation that are ostensibly about one thing that, you know, you see in the title, but that actually pull at much deeper parts of who we are and generate conversation. And, you know, we don't do a lot of day-long things here because the truth is, it's a big city out there. There's a lot of really good stuff that everyone could be doing at any time of the day, and it's hard enough to get 20 people sitting in a room, you know, from 6 to 7:30. And we've had people come and, you know, talk about their Pulitzer Prize winning books to very small audiences. And so the fact that we had more than 100 people RSVP and show up at 1:30 this afternoon, and that it's past 7, past the time when we were supposed to end. We didn't give you that much wine, and there's still so many of us here, and that if we all continued the conversation until 9:30, you know, some of you would go home, but other people would come in. You know, it's a testament to the significance of the things we're discussing here today, which I think is important to register in the context of a university, because, you know, there's a lot of criticism for universities for promoting the worst parts of sports culture, you know, the USC stories, the corruption, the money, the cheating. But in fact, sports actually has a lot to teach people in universities about our relationships and how the world works, and gender and inequality and politics and aesthetics and coordination and joy, and that's been completely visible today in every single one of these panels. And so I want to thank all of you for making this day, what it has been. It's really exceptional, and I feel a sense of pride as someone who's been working on this project for the last several months, that it's come together in the way that it has. And it wouldn't have come together were it not for the many people who helped to make this possible. So first of all, Amy Bass has been the giant behind the scenes of this whole event. Amy, you completely made this possible. Thank you. Amy was the star of the last event that we did on the World Cup last year, and someone said during the thing, let's make sure we do this again next year for the Women's World Cup. I'm going to tell you the truth. The last panel last year we had was Raj Bennett and John Green, the YA author and soccer expert, and the energy in the room was, don't tell them I said this, turn off the video camera. They're great, they're both great, but there's nothing like what we did here tonight. It's just a totally different feel. So, Amy made this thing happen, helped us figure out who we needed to invite, and thank you. Rowan and Josh, the other co-conspirators, have also been terrific, and it's been fun to plan this with you. Jess and Sierra and Sued, thank you guys. Serena too. The panelists, you guys have been terrific. Some of you did multiple events today. Sorry, I said Serena. Soraya, you're back there. Soraya, thank you. Some of you guys did multiple panels today, which was really generous of you. We appreciate it. This has been terrific, and I want to stop, not so that we can actually stop, but so that we can all go into the other room. We put out a whole new set of cheese and wine. There's lots more food. This party is not going to end, but the point is really for us to build something and to get to know each other. And there are a lot of people who just want to meet you guys and talk a little bit more intimately. We have a chance to do that. Thanks to everyone. Let's all go out and have a really interesting cup. The USA is going to win. Let's be clear about it. And
Thank you.
oh, come on.
And I have a request.
Yeah.
Can we put a classic game on the screen?
Absolutely.
Somebody pick the game. Or let Andrew. We have Andrew here.
Actually, I have a hard drive full of every single WSA game.
Can we it's like a club,
Okay, we're gonna work out. There'll be a match on soon enough, but for the time being, go get some wine and cheese, and make sure you get to know each other a little bit more too. Thank you.
England 1, USA 0.